Hi everyone, my name is Usman Mushtaq. I'm a master's candidate at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. I'm in the humanitarian engineering stream in the civil engineering department. I'm not currently teaching any classes this term, but I have taught classes in engineering ethics, public health engineering, and run several workshops on social justice engineering and engineering education, for Engineers Without Borders and other organizations. In particular, for this self-interview, I'll be talking about a course that I taught last year called APSI 190 Professional Ethics for Engineers, which was a ethics course for first-year engineers. I became interested in social justice through two events in my life. The first was living in Saudi Arabia. I grew up there for most of my early childhood. We were in Saudi Arabia during the first Persian Gulf War. In the first Gulf War, the U.S. occupied the city my family lived in at that time, called Riyadh, which was the capital city of Saudi Arabia. So my family and I, we lived through that war. And after the war ended, we were kicked out of the country because of the collapse of the wartime economy. I don't remember a lot about the war, but I do remember seeing all these instruments of war in the sky, like all these helicopters, troop transports, aircrafts just coming into what I considered my home at that time. Coming without my permission, like literally filling up the skies of my home with all kinds of weaponry and machinery, and death and destruction. And so we lived through that war. You know, we put up with the air raid sirens. We wore gas masks. We did all that, and it showed me, you know, having lived through that, it showed me unfortunately the imperial side of American foreign policy, although that's not how I would put it at that time. After my undergraduate in engineering, I ended up working for this software company developing simulation software. Now, I ended up getting assigned to this project, designing simulation software to test hull strengths of aircrafts and helicopters, and so this was really the second event in my life that that connected back to the first event, which is, you know, I'm designing the same helicopters and troop transports and aircrafts and weapons, or not directly designing them, but at least contributing to their design. I'm contributing to the design of these weapons that had negatively impacted the lives of my father, my mother, my brother, my sister, and I. Coming to social justice was, of course, a process for me, but these two events charted my course to understanding and thinking about justice and my profession. If I, the victim of technology, weapons technology, could end up designing the same weapons or contributing to their design, what hope do other engineers have? So for the next few years after my undergrad and still now, I struggle to connect the lessons of my life experience with my work. You know, having lived through the war, having experienced firsthand what these weapons do, and so, you know, that's how I became interested in social justice and engineering. And so, you know, for me, this is important because engineers make decisions either explicitly or, in my case, complicitly, to take part in all kinds of unjust projects like weapons development, but also mining on indigenous land, supporting mega projects that destroy communities, and really the list goes on, right? I'm not under any false mindset that engineers can single-handedly um, you know, change anything or stop all these things, but they need to be part of resistance movements to these things. So they need to take part in indigenous resistance. They need to fight the state. They need to fight police surveillance. They need to fight capitalism. So the question for me is, how do I teach engineers to do that? And how do I, as an engineer, do that and remain true to my life experiences? The next question was why is social justice important to me? And I think, well, the quick answer is that a lack of justice directly affects me. When a cop pulls me over, or when Queen's University, the university I study and teach at, changes the funding process to make it less accessible to low-income and working-class students, that affects me as a person of color, as a working-class student. More broadly, though, justice is important to me because, as Bell Hooks says, if we want a beloved community, we must stand for justice, have recognition for difference, without attaching difference to privilege. I want to live in a community where power is used equitably, where oppression is examined, and privilege is smashed. And so without justice, I cannot live in such a community. So that's my sort of philosophical reason for why I care about justice, but like I said, it also relates to my life experiences, and I want to remain true to those life experiences. The biggest way I incorporate social justice in my course, which I mentioned earlier, AppSci 190, which was a professional ethics course, was through my teaching pedagogy. I tried to run my course in a socially just manner by using Freirean pedagogy to the best of my abilities and resources. For those of you who aren't familiar with the work of Paulo Freire, I'll give a quick overview of his pedagogy and its relationship to social justice. Freire was a Brazilian educator who taught literacy among the poorest of the poor in Brazil. We're talking about sharecropper farmers, landless peasants, campesinos. He rejected what he called the banking style of education, which values top-down teaching. In banking education, there is one authority in the classroom, the teacher, and all teaching happens from the teacher to the student. There's no student input into the classroom, and classroom relations are very much dictated by hierarchy. More importantly, banking education reproduces the social order of the world in the mind of the students. There is no critical questioning, and students are taught the world is as is. Freire argued that such an education was at best useless to those who were subjects of unjust power, whether that power was white privilege, class privilege, patriarchy, heteronormativity, and at worst taught the oppressed that their only place in the world was to continue being oppressed, and in fact to reproduce that oppression on others through internalizing it. So poor landless peasants, for example, beat their wives, reproducing patriarchy, not seeing how capitalism oppresses them. So Freire wrote about all this, and so he believes that, or he argued that a lot of teaching is banking education or banking teaching, which is that teaching always comes from top, goes down to the students. So as a counter to such banking education, Freire proposed his pedagogy of the oppressed, in which learning is a community effort, hierarchy is destroyed as much as possible, the teacher can be a learner, and learners can be teachers. The concerns of the oppressed dominate learning, and reality as is questioned. Students are taught to critically read reality and learn how they may be part of oppressive power relations. So really his pedagogy of the oppressed speaks to power, speaks to domination, speaks to injustice, speaks to giving hope to students that the world as is doesn't have to be. The world as is inequitable and should and can be changed. So really that's what his pedagogy is about, and I encourage you to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed if you haven't already read that or looked at that. And so I brought this pedagogy into my course because I think social justice is not only about what the content of the course is, but also about how I as a teacher deliver content, how I as a teacher position myself to students, how do I both learn and teach my students. So part of it was making physical changes. So I removed desks and rows from my classroom. My students sat in chairs in a circle. I avoided presentations on a projector screen, used a blackboard sparingly, instead preferring to write or present on a flip chart with markers. And the flip chart was, I usually placed it somewhere in the circle as well. If there was group work involved, I arranged desks and chairs in clusters, again in a circle, so there was no hierarchy. I gave students, when they were doing this group work, plenty of different kinds of media: sticky notes, poster paper, 8 by 11.5 paper, markers, pens. You know, I let them express themselves in any way, in any media they saw fit. And then sometimes for the group work, again, I would let some of the students use the blackboard while I sat in the chairs. So, you know, there was, or what I think is a reversal of power relations in ways. So in my teaching approach, I was careful to always position myself not as an authority. In my first class, I talked about my positionality as a teacher, pointing out my social position, my privileges, the fact that I'm male identified, heteronormative, working class, and a person of color, for example. We talked about how my social position would influence how and what I taught in class. So over the next few classes, I would always bring up this idea of positionality, always pointing out why I was saying what I was saying. I also encouraged them to do the same when they were voicing their opinions and thoughts in the class. In this way, the discussions between the students and me and between the students themselves sometimes became not about what the students had said, but what in their position would make them say that or why they said that. So we actually got some good discussions out of the class about positionality, power, and privilege, and so it became a integral part of the class in that way. The students, as part of their coursework, had to work on a design project for the term. A word about the course before I go on. The course syllabus was actually designed by Jonathan Vandersteen, a PhD candidate at Queen's at that time. He's since graduated and actually did a postdoc at Guelph University and recently finished that as well. It's a great syllabus, but I won't talk about that because really that's Jonathan's work. I will give a brief overview of the syllabus though. The syllabus has students work every week on a particular aspect of a design project. So every week they'd work on one stage of it. So 1 week it would be community concerns, 1 week it would be research into technical matters, 1 week there would be power mapping of stakeholders. In addition to all the activities that the students had to undertake for the project, I always showed them a YouTube video or a series of pics or audio from talks, speeches, etc. that related to the topic, and then we read them in the Freirean sense as a class. We identified the stakeholders, power relations, biases, what reality was presented, why it was presented as is, who had to gain from that, and who lost from that. Sometimes I showed them competing visions of reality as is. So one of my classes working on a design project involving nuclear waste. So I showed them video from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and a video created by members of the community that may in the future be affected by nuclear waste mining. And so we talked about those videos, how the videos both showed particular aspects of reality and they both presented their reality as is, and really we from there we used it as a springboard for getting into discussions of whose version of reality is usually accepted, and what that has to do with power. So we had some great discussions in that way, and really making that part of the class was important for me because it got students questioning where they got their information from and what that information means, and hopefully, they can use that in the future as engineers in critiquing what information they're getting and who benefits from it. I encountered several difficulties with the course. One was time. There just wasn't enough time to prepare for the course and teach it. It was really little things like I had to go before the class, every single class, to move desks out of the way, get chairs in a circle, because most classes are taught using desks in rows. And so, that time adds up. And then, of course, if you're spending time modifying content and, if you're a faculty member or a graduate student, I imagine you have other things to do as well, which, I had my own research to work on. At one point, I was told by the faculty to stick to the syllabus, that my modifications to the syllabus were not welcome. The way I was teaching in the class wasn't really critiqued, but the extra items I brought in about positionality and reading media sources in the Freirean sense weren't welcome, and so I did face resistance from faculty in that way. And in this case, I just ignored their concerns and went on teaching the course in the way that I thought was best to teach the course. But I imagine that isn't the case for everyone, because they may have more concerns. The faculty might have more of a say in whether they get a job in the future. And then I found the students were largely receptive. One problem was that they, when I would assign them readings, they wouldn't do it. But that's more a struggle of how do I make a course interesting to students, and it's important to note, I think, that they were first-year students, so sometimes reading can be a hard thing to get students to do, especially in their first year at a university. And finally, the last difficulty I encountered was that the curriculum was pretty much defined for me. So I couldn't significantly change the curriculum. What I could work on was my method of teaching, my method of content delivery, and so that's what I decided to adopt Freirean pedagogy in teaching the course, because for me that still, the way I taught the class still got to concerns of social justice in the classroom, but also equipped students with various skills and tools that they could use in the future to question, like Freire would say, question the world as is and have hope for change. So I want to thank Jen Schneider, Juan Lucena, and John Ladens for letting me contribute.